Welcome to the Everything Yachting YouTube channel. Our goal is to help yacht buyers, yacht owners, and yacht sellers through interesting, educational, and informative discussions on topics that are anything and everything yachting related. All right, thanks for joining us today. I'm here with my good friend, longtime everything, Rod Silva. And we decided that since we've been surveying sea trial on so many boats this summer all over the world, that we would jump into a topic that I guess the easiest way to say this is with a little bit more time and energy, with somebody like us aboard your boat, we can help save you some of these things. So these things are, let me back up. Photos and videos of yachts online look beautiful, but sometimes that image isn't what you see when you show up to look at that boat, right? A picture or video can make a yacht look like a 9 out of 10, and you show up day one and you're ready to go. Maybe you never saw it and you negotiated a deal subject to visual inspection, and it's a 5 out of 10, and the broker told you all good stuff, and you got there and it wasn't what you expected. So what we want to do is talk about the things that buyers, sellers, purchasers, whomever's, right, should be doing to make a boat, a multi-million-dollar motor yacht, ready for sale. It's not just sale. It can be a pre-trip. It can be pre-purchase, pre-survey, pre-sale. These are all good boating practices that we wanted to discuss today. So what we've done is Rod and I have kind of done a little bit of homework, reflected back over the past 2 years, stuff that's jumped in front of us during a deal that could have been ironed out beforehand. And I also took some notes in my last survey where, hey, these are things that we could have been more proactive in catching on the front end of it had we just spent a little bit more time talking with the owner, talking with the captain or whoever to make sure that they did a little bit of a check. I'm going to pause for a second and say, Rod, is there anything you want to add to that as an intro to the general topic of what we're trying to cover today?
No, you covered it pretty well. We're basically just focusing on the overall maintenance that you should do on your vessel, and that extra step to get it ready for that sale or to get it ready for that next trip or whatever that may be.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I've got mine color coded because that's who I am, right? Black pen, red notes, blue notes, all that type of stuff. So why don't we just start with the general thing, which you and I have shared here for engines and mechanical systems, right? So let's just pretend that I am a yacht owner. It doesn't matter the brand. It does matter for conversation's sake that's a well-equipped diesel-powered motor yacht, because we're going to touch on all those types of things and systems. What would you tell me, again, category, engine mechanical systems, what would you want to talk about with me before I would want a client to come see the boat in person, or before you would want to list the boat, or maybe as a setup to why you need to go inspect that vessel before you tell him what it's worth or what you would want to ask for it?
So I see it as two different levels of inspecting that vessel. One is just visual, right? You want to get on that boat. You want to make sure there's no leaks. There's nothing that jumps out at you that would draw attention in a negative way to a potential buyer, or if you're going on a trip, if there's something that is potentially wrong with the engines or the generators in the engine room or whatnot. The second level of that is mechanically what good a shape is that boat in? Meaning, is it making the RPMs, right? You can check that every time you take your boat out and make sure that even if you cruise it 8-10 knots somewhere slow, just run it up towards the end of the trip.
Let's use C18 for an example. So maybe somebody out there has C18s in their boat and they could go, what are you talking about RPMs, right? So let's say 1,000 horsepower, 1150, similar conversation. What are those RPMs that it should make?
So they should be rated at 2,300 RPMs. And
2,350, it would be ideal.
Right. And depending on the age, that's going to vary a little bit, but a new one, 2,350 is ideal. If you only run them at 1,900 or 2,000 RPMs or whatnot, you might not be getting an accurate reading of the health of that, of that engine. So
well, what do you mean by health? Is that temperature? Is that fuel burn? Is that speed? Is it RPMs? What do you mean?
It's, you and I, for example, are no different than engines, right? We can run, or walk at a fast pace, but when you do an all-out sprint, you should be able to, based on your age and, your overall health, you should be able to go for a certain amount of time and be able to do that.
Jog a mile. You tell me I got to be able to jog a mile?
If we walk, we can go much longer, right? But we should be able to get to a certain speed or RPM, right? The engine is the same way. They should be able to get to that RPM, which shows that it is making the maximum power that engine is designed to put out.
So when you ask me that question and I go, I don't know, it does 18 knots. What is your next step? Because I just kind of told you I didn't really check it recently.
I've done this a number of times. If I'm listing your boat, I want to make sure that I know what I'm representing. So I will ask first, I would like to get on your boat and make sure that it's in decent shape. And if you don't know some of the answers to these questions, let's go out. Let's go for a quick spin. You show me how you run your boat. And there's going to be probably a couple of things that I'm going to show you that you may not know about your own boat.
Right.
That way, when, again, I'm representing your boat, when a buyer comes to purchase that vessel, I have all the answers that I need.
Okay.
And if something needs to be addressed, if it's not making the RPMs or if something is off, we can address that before we take that trip or before we put it up for sale so that doesn't come up, at that time.
Okay. So we talked about RPMs. Let's talk about I'm going to throw 4 others at you. You pick one, okay? Belts, hoses, zincs, oil, vibrations. 2 of those I would like to talk about in depth, but let's see which ones you want to jump on.
Usually, if we're continuing with preparing the boat for a sale, oil is something they're going to really look at, right? The age of the oil in that engine. They're going to do oil samples. They're going to pull oil and see basically like when we get blood drawn out of us, they want to see what the inside of that engine looks like. If the engine is rated to have the oil changed every 100 hours or 200 hours, and you see there's 300 hours on that oil, there's probably going to be some stuff in there that isn't going to be positive, right? So even though the engine might be in good shape, the samples may come back yellow or red even. So you want to make sure that if you're putting the boat up for sale, you are within that period of what is acceptable for the oil age and how long the oil has been in that engine, not just the number of hours, but if it's been in there for 2 years because you haven't used the boat that much, that's something to consider as well.
When you say yellow or red, do you mean my clear oil that I put in, or my amber colored oil that I put in, it changes color before it gets black and black's bad or red's bad? What do you mean by that?
No. So when you go to sell your boat, right? The buyer is going to have an engine surveyor come out and do oil samples on the set of engines. They're going to draw oil. They're going to send it to a lab, and that lab is going to test for a number of things, metals and whatnot, and
zincs,
it's going,
iron.
Depending on the engines, there's going to be a list of what they test for. Some have different components than others.
Right.
But metals is usually, that's kind of a broad statement of what we like to use. And they're going to put out a report that says the oil samples came back green, meaning everything's great. Okay. Yellow means that there's something that you need to kind of monitor and see, what it might be to avoid a potential issue.
So on deals, greens generally, like you said, mean no problem. So there's not a lot of time spent on that. Yellows, if we get a yellow and I'm a seller, right? How does that affect me time-wise in a deal? What can occur?
As far as getting the deal done, or
yeah, you've did a great job. You got me $1 million for my boat. We're all ready to go. I had the best boat ever because I listened to everything that you said. 0 survey items other than I got a yellow oil sample. Now what? Or a red oil sample. Now what?
We want to dive a little bit deeper into what is causing, that report, right? If it's an elevated sodium, or if it's elevated aluminum, or whatever that may be. And we usually like to go back to the manufacturer and see what is acceptable within the range of what they're reporting. Sometimes they'll ask you to change the oil, put another 10, 20, 30 hours, whatever that may be, whatever the manufacturer deems acceptable, and retest.
Or cut the filter open potentially.
Exactly.
To look for catastrophic.
Exactly. Usually we see that when it's red oil samples and they think there might be something a little bit more involved. So they'll ask you to do a lot more.
Or certain metal, they'll say cut it open, where another one they'll say change it, flush it out, retest. So
correct.
What we're saying is we follow the manufacturer's guidelines on how to get through the trouble. But if we can find out this trouble 6 months before we go to list, you can correct it before it becomes a delay in your closing.
Right.
Or a lost deal.
We're not the experts on the engines themselves, but we are the experts when it comes to what to look for in order to avoid these things.
Right. And we have the Caterpillar experts or whomever engines are in the boat to use our expertise and their expertise to get the job done. Right. That's what we're trying to do. So you talked about oil, which is great. Red oil samples. I often come across red oil samples for a couple reasons. The person is long in the tooth on changing their oil changes, right? They try to stretch it every single time, or it's too long on time in the boat. And it's important for you guys to know it's not just the hours, it's also the time, because the metals leach into the oil over time as it sits there, and you can get an elevated metal reading even though you haven't started your boat in 6 months or 12 months. You can also get, here in Florida, the temperature increase and decrease causes condensation to occur, and sometimes you can get rust inside of an engine even though you haven't had a lot of wear, and that shows up in the oil. So there's different theories and recommendations from engine manufacturers. Maybe leave an engine block heater on, you know, during the summertime, maybe not, depends on where you're at. Talk to your engine experts, get that advice for them. Do annual oil changes and annual oil reports so you know if you green and have a trend of green, or yellows and how do I get into green, or more, gosh, I got a red, how do I get to a yellow, how do I get to green before I want to sell. It takes the headache out of the post-survey negotiation process on any boat if we don't have those issues, or we spend a little bit of time in advance to get those issues corrected.
Right. As a general statement, not just with oil, but with anything maintenance wise, if you're looking to sell your boat, you're either going to have to pay for it now, or you're going to have to pay for it at the time the boat sells, you know, or survey or whatnot. So why not make sure that you're putting forth the best boat that you can potentially sell, and pay for those things now if it needs to be an oil change or a service or whatever that may be, because that may be the one thing that turns that buyer away from, you know, wanting your vessel. Right. And if you're going to have to pay for it, whether it's now or later, might as well just do it and make sure that's, just take that off the table as a potential issue.
And oftentimes it saves you money long-term and gives you benefit now. This conversation of oil, maybe you roll the dice a little bit and you never see it and it never causes you an issue. But if we're talking about something like a depth sounder, oh yeah, the depth sounder has been working, I'll get to it eventually. Oh, now Rod, something changed my life, I want to sell the boat. Oh, it's fine, there's nothing broken. And well, what about that depth sounder? That's going to be really important to the new guy who bought the boat. It wasn't important to you.
Right.
And had you spent the $500 to fix it, you could have had a depth sounder for those 12 months you were cruising the boat, and maybe not run aground and spent X dollars on prop repair. You know, it's all those things. Like no one's making you take care of this like the FAA makes you take care of an airplane. You know, so there's a lot of wiggle room on maintenance. But if they did, you know, we would have a lot easier time when it came to survey, because I would think we would have a lot less issues. Right. And I'm not saying that we have a lot of issues. I'm just trying to take some time, because we are the experts in the conversation and we can share this with you. So you can either learn on pre-purchase what to be looking for, understand the broker you're talking to. If you ask some of these questions, they don't understand what you're talking about, maybe you should shop for a different broker, or, you know, what to look for as you're reading your survey result, because the sum of the parts kind of tells you how it was cared for. And a well-maintained and cared for boat is a more valuable boat.
That's exactly right. The perception, right? Even though it may be something simple, if something comes up on survey, that buyer may perceive that as this boat was not well maintained. So if you can get ahead of that, is much, much easier to get through that deal.
Engine zincs is a great example of that.
Exactly.
Okay. So you get a little engine pencil zinc that sits inside that engine, and the surveyor, you know, comes, everything looks great in the boat. He opens the engine up and there's 0 pencil zincs inside of it. Was that cause for concern?
Could be. Right. It could very well be a cause for concern, because
they were never there.
They were never there. It may have never seen an issue that could have pointed at the zincs, but that is going to be on the report, and they're going to see it as, well, if this guy didn't take care of his engines, clearly because there's no zincs there, what else did he not take care of?
Right. And if the guy can show you 3 months prior, I just had all the zincs replaced, I've run it hard for the past 3 months playing and they wore out quickly, then that's at least some evidence of prior care. Versus engine zincs. What are those? Then you're going, well, how long has the salt water been in there, assuming it's salt water in Florida, and what damage has it potentially done to the internal components?
Not everything's always going to be perfect, but just like you said, as long as there's a story, as long as you can explain something that makes sense, then this should be fine.
What are some things you look for on belts and hoses that a visual person, anybody, could walk in, do a visual inspection, go, oh, that doesn't look right?
You know, if you see cracking, or if you see the disintegrating, sometimes it can be rusted clamps on the hoses, not just the hoses themselves. Or if you touch them, you're feeling for them, and you can kind of feel that rubbery substance that comes off of them, that sticks to your fingers. That sort of stuff could be an indication that they might be ready to be replaced, or just have, if you're not an expert in that, have somebody get aboard, a technician that can tell you what needs to be done.
Exactly. If you're not the expert, hire an expert, get them aboard and get those things corrected. It's not just for pre-sale. It's pre-trip. Why wouldn't you fix those things before you go to the Bahamas for 3 months? You know, do you want to have that broken there in the Bahamas? That could be worse than losing a deal or delaying a deal because you're delaying your vacation or safety or whatever it is, depending upon what component breaks that we're talking about.
Exactly.
Vibrations, right? So that's a good conversation because I didn't have my depth sounder working and it was fine. And sure, I kicked up some mud and everything's fine. And I got no problems with my boat, Rod. Let's list it. Let's go. Do you do a sea trial if you don't get the right answers to your questions?
Absolutely. Like we just spoke about, if you don't have a really good understanding of what you're representing, you want to do a sea trial with the owner, because we want them to show us what they see and what they don't see. They may have bought a boat a couple of years ago that always vibrated, so it's normal to them, right? But to us, we may see that it maybe not, or maybe he just kissed the bottom here and there, and there's a little bit of vibration due to the props being bent, or maybe the shafts or something,
or
right?
a line around the prop, or a loose motor mount. There's so many different things that can cause a wiggle in it. And what we can do is if we go for a sea trial, we can help you figure that out. Say, hey, it's not this, we think it's in this area, right? Let's get a diver in, let's get this service, let's get this hauled out, right? There's a couple different ways to figure out the next step to make it right so that the pictures don't get a buyer in and then we don't perform on survey sea trial day.
Exactly.
That's what it comes down to.
I think we can all agree that we get used to our surroundings, right? Whether it be smells or whether it be noises or whatnot. So you as a buyer doesn't mean that you're negligent. You just got used to a certain something and you don't see anything wrong with it. That's when we can step on the boat and say, this is not right, or this doesn't seem to be right, and we can further investigate it.
Grandma's house is a great example.
That's right.
Show up at Grandma's house and be like, when are you going to paint this thing? And she turns around and goes, it was just painted. And then you remind her that was 20 years ago.
Exactly.
Right. All right. So that's probably deep enough for engines, mechanical systems, for this media platform. If you guys have specific questions on any of this stuff, please reach out direct. Our contact information will be up there. All right, let's go into electrical systems. And by electrical systems, I want to kind of define that as lights, navigation lights, spotlights, that type of stuff, appliances, whatever we want to call electrical. How do you handle that conversation in a pre-listing meeting or call?
So I think that's one of those things that you should always stay on top of, whether it's your boat and you're going on a trip or whether you're getting ready to list it. Because if you're going to be on a 3-month trip, you want to make sure that your appliances work. You have your lights, you have everything that you're going to need for that trip. If you're going to sell that boat, those are things that will come up on survey, and going back to perception, they might be those things that a buyer sees as, if they didn't maintain their oven, right? What else did they not maintain? It could have been that the previous owner just didn't care for cooking, but you want to make sure that those important items for anybody are well taken care of. If you're going to go on a trip, make sure you have extra light bulbs, right? If you're going to sell the boat, make sure that all the switches work. Obviously, if it's a used boat, you're selling it, if one light is out because it went out last night, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. But overall, you want to make sure you're close to 100% on anything that is electrical.
I sold a boat not that long ago, so I'll role play here because I think this is the most natural way for everybody to understand what the conversation is. So I've got a 20-year-old boat. I've owned it for 6 years. My washer or dryer broke at some point in time during my ownership, but it's not a problem because I only go marina to marina, and I only go to the places that have laundry service, so I'm not worried about that not working. And I've got redundancy in my chiller systems, and one of the chillers isn't working, and I'm not going to spend 20 grand to fix it. So I'd like you to sell my boat with this stuff as is, because I can stay here for 3 or 6 months using it while you're trying to sell it, and it doesn't affect me, and I just don't want to spend the money on that right now.
Right. It may not affect you, but a buyer looking at your vessel is going to want to see that both chillers are working, and they're going to want to see that the washer and dryer are working. Otherwise, they're just going to assume that everything's broken, and they're going to either ask for a credit or ask for a reduction in the purchase price. so that they can go ahead now and take on that project to replace the washer and dryer and potentially the wiring or the plumbing behind that equipment, because they don't know if it's good or not. They just have to assume it's not because it's currently not working. Mm-hmm. Same with the chillers, right? So it may cost you more money in the long run because
I've already got bids for it. I know it's $5 to fix the washer and dryer and $10 to fix the air conditioning system. So since I don't want to spend that $5 and $10 now, and I can tell you what it costs to fix it, then it doesn't matter, and I'll deal with it at closing.
So it's $15 to get it all fixed, or you may potentially end up spending $30 in order to make that deal go through, because they're not going to take your word for it, right?
It's exactly the point of the conversation I wanted to get to. The buyer assumes when the thing is $5 and $10 that it won't cost him that. He's going to at least ask for $7 or $9 or maybe even double in his negotiations, because he wants to make sure there's extra room for the money side of it. But what the sellers don't often factor in is the time. You think a buyer wants to buy a boat today and then put it in a yard for 6 months and wait to use his toy? Who wants to get a Christmas present and not open it for 6 months? Everybody wants to go use the toy. So you're not only inconveniencing or dismotivating, maybe is a word I'll say, a buyer from the purchase on the money side, but it's the time side, it's the inconvenience side. So the time to handle those things is early on in the, hey, I think I want to list my boat conversation, so that you can be set up for minimal dollars in inconvenience and receive maximum dollars when it's time to actually make that deal happen.
And, paying more might actually be best case scenario. Oftentimes I see that just kills the deal because people don't want to take on that project. Mm-hmm. So they'll just walk away from that, even though it was a perfectly fine vessel that needed the $30 to get it up and running, but they just don't want to take on that project. So they will move away from your boat and go on to the next one.
I can't tell you how many times I've had somebody come in with $1.5 million budget, look at $1.3 million boat and say, that's not the boat for me, because the seller didn't take care of some of these things or didn't take care of some other stuff we're going to talk about in the list. And now they go spend $2 million on a newer boat and they're happier. Mm-hmm. That happens a lot.
Of course.
Because people want to get what they want to get.
Right.
Right. All right. So I think that electrical, we've talked about some stuff. Make sure your lights work. If you walk through and his light burned out, please get that corrected. Nav light, same thing. Spotlight, same thing. Appliances, same thing. All right. So now let's go into water systems, toilets, showers, sinks, water damage, corrosion, leaks. What if you walked into a vessel before and said, we want to fix this before? And how did you take care of it? How long did it take? And what did the dollars take versus what you think the consequences would have been if you didn't act that way?
So it's very similar to the conversation we just had about electrical systems, right? If you're going on a trip, you're going to need those things. You're going to want those things. When you go to sell a boat, the buyer is going to want to need those things. So let's just get them taken care of. It could be, hey, that guest toilet has been working for 6 months, but we never use it because we never have guests aboard. Whenever our guests come to the boat, they can use the other toilet or they stay in the hotel, right? Well, it's important to that family that's going to be buying your boat that has a teenage son that's going to be in that room. They need that, right? So same conversation. They're just going to assume that it's not working properly and they're going to ask for significantly more money to get that rectified. If there's a leak, obviously that's, you never want leaks in the boat, whether it's fresh water or raw water. You want to have those things fixed. If it's something that is, you walk in a boat and you see corrosion, you see rust, whether it's on the sink or whether it's on, any of the appliances or, in the heads, you want to get those things correct. You want to see what is causing that corrosion, where those leaks are coming from, because you could see one thing in this corner, but that water could be running from, way over here under, over the headliner, and it's making its way across. So you want to make sure that you catch those things early on so that they don't become a problem, down the line.
Yeah. This whole conversation reminds me of when I get on a boat, person wants to list it, and they open up the cabinet underneath the grill, and I see what's in there, and I wouldn't want to breathe as I look in there and I see black, mold or mold of any type, inside a cabinet. Now I get why that's there. They wash the boat, they dry the boat, it gets humid in there. We're in Florida, it heats up, whatever. It gets moist, that occurs, that grows. But the the correction to that is to have somebody clean it out once or
Mhm.
twice a year. Take the stuff out, clean it out inside, because that visual that goes through the rest of the boat in my mind.
Right.
I just assume everything I'm going to see is going to have that tail on the back end of it, which is a negative tail.
Right.
So as we walk through in these pre-listings, that stuff that we look at and say, you ought to have your captain clean this cabinet out, or you should have the boat fluffed and buffed, and make sure the detailer knows is that he's going to, as you remove and declutter your vessel, have him take that stuff out of that cabinet and wipe it down, with a little maybe water bleach solution if it's a, fiberglass type material on the inside to clean it up.
And it's a safety thing. Like you said, mold, nobody wants to be bringing that stuff in. So, depending on what you store in that cabinet that's got the mold in it, if you ever need to use that, you want to make sure it's clean.
Right.
If you're
And
gonna have your family.
some buyers are very sensitive to animal smells, mold smells, head odor smells, whatever. So you just want to make sure you've got something good to sell so anybody can buy it. That's really the takeaway of the conversation.
Right.
All right. So toilets, leaks we've talked about, those can be leaks below deck as well. You could see staining or you could see odors. Get that cleaned up. An easy tip on that, if you want to know if your boat smells, this sounds really silly, but those marine sanitation hoses have a shelf life. Let's just say, for conversation's sake today, that this is an 8 to 10 year shelf life period based on the variables and conditions that change that. And your boat, do you think your friends come over and says it has a head smell? Well, your toilets don't seem to be the smelling area. You open up the bilge hatch and, it looks like it smells down there. Well, where's it coming from? Typically, it's those hoses that sit and collect water for a period of time. That water permeates through that white hose. How do I know if that smells? Take a paper towel, get it wet, go down there, rub that, right? You got to kind of pre-plan this. Go off the boat, get your friend with the good nose and have them smell that. That way they're not contaminated, not in the boat. They just came out with a wet paper towel. Well, what does this smell like? I smell nothing, or it smells like a head odor. Now you've identified where that odor is probably coming from. You can have a professional service company come out, change those hoses, which they should be done, and let's just call it a 10-year cycle for conversation's sake. And now that would reduce that smell inside the boat if that was the only source of it. Right? Showers and sinks, gray water tanks can smell like black water tanks, especially if you are in the shower and urinate in them, right? They're not designed for that. So pee in the toilets, right? Don't pee in the shower. It is something that can cause a smell in a boat because that gray water tank is not a black water tank. Okay.
It's okay to do at home, not on the boat.
I mean, leaks are pretty simple. Water damage. Where do we see water damage from? My grandson was on the boat. We pulled anchor early. I didn't know he was sleeping with the window open, and we took off, and I didn't check it. It's my fault. And we got some salt water in that room, or the hatch wasn't secured all the way, or the air conditioning condensate drain was clogged because I didn't do my preventative maintenance on it, and it backflowed and put water in the deck. So you've got stains on this boat. Let's just pretend there's 3. What do you tell your clients to do before we go live?
Fix them. Right. First thing is identify where the problem is coming from. If it's one of those things where it was just water that came in from an open porthole or hatch, fairly easy to fix, right? Make sure that everything's shut, wipe it down. If it was shut, but there is water coming in somehow, check the gaskets, make sure that those are repaired. It could be that it's coming in from behind a cabinet. And what is behind that cabinet? What's in there? Could it be an ice maker? Could it be a sink? Something that has some sort of water line going to it that may have come loose or it's leaking or whatnot. And that is what's causing it. So first thing is identify it. Make sure that there's no active leaks. And then if you can repair that, if it's a panel that can be easily changed out or covered or have something done aesthetically to make it look better, that's what's recommended. Obviously, the first thing is make sure that you fix the problem.
I had a client's boat I looked at about 2 months ago for a pre-listing walkthrough. Gave him some advice. One of the topics actually happened to be a condensate pan that overflowed, stained the floor, went through what we do here, just to oversimplify that, some sort of dry in temperature, right? To let that moisture evaporate and cure and hopefully return back to their natural color without any further repairs needed. So he's in the process of doing that. What does that look like? You ever see like the heat lamp that's in an iguana cage? It has a little clips on it with just a regular 40, 60, whatever watt light bulb, depending upon what you're doing. That on a mounting block system where it is literally just plugged in with a light shining on that wood so that it dries it out slowly, right? That's how you do it without damaging the finish. And that works well a lot of times. So that's for a small little repair. And that's something I told him to do, and he's been doing that. So when he's done, I'll go back, look at the boat, talk about evaluation, talk about a photo shoot schedule, and now have a boat that matches the photos that we're actually putting out there. All right. Anything else on water systems you want to chat about?
No, I think we pretty much covered a good amount there.
I would just add filters. Maybe you haven't used your boat for 8 months and you finally decided to sell it. It's really nice to have those filters changed before survey day, because if the surveyor jumps down there, looks, and your filter's all black on your water system, they're just going to assume the worst in everything else, So get your tanks cleaned and flushed, get your water filters changed.
It does remind me of something. Do a little role playing again.
Okay.
I have a water maker, but I always go to the marinas. I don't have a need for a water maker, so it works perfectly fine. But I haven't ran it for a while.
Yeah. So pickling a water maker is one option that you can do. Okay. But that brine or pickle juice you're going to have in there, let's just say that's a 6-month shelf life before either it deteriorates or the filters deteriorate, or a combination of both. I'm oversimplifying this. Okay. So if I put that in there and that's on the shelf for 6 months, that's fine. So month 5, we can depickle it and use it again. But month 12, maybe we need to change the filters. That's the type of conversation we're having with the seller to make a decision as to what his use is going to be of that water maker, his timing of the sale, and when we think we're going to sell, so we can come up with a plan. Because if you're going to be using your boat, Mr. Jones, for the next 10 months, and it's going to be hard for me to sell, then keep using it. Don't pickle it. Go. If you're going to park your boat and bring it here at Marlow Marine, and we're going to be asking the moon for your boat, right? Maybe I'm going to tell you to pickle it. Right? If we're going to be priced aggressively and you want to, get this boat sold quickly, maybe I'm going to say, let's do a backwater flush every 2 weeks. It's a maintenance item like mowing the grass with a timeline variable based on a lot of stuff. And a lot of those decisions are in your court as an owner to tell me, can I just have the boat and sell it here? Because if I can just have the boat, I'm going to get it sold way quicker than if you're cruising the Bahamas and I call you on a Friday for a Saturday show and you tell me my whole family's aboard. It's not convenient right now. That kills motivation of buyers for certain vessels. They stop talking about that one and they go, okay, what else do you have? Right. So it's a timing thing of that water maker and a use thing of that water maker. I would say that a lot of times our clients don't use them enough, and they are either pickled too long or they're not in the back flush program. So that's a great point to bring up on a pre-purchase or pre-listing walkthrough, is the conversation of the water maker and where's it at and what do we need to do to get it right. The good news is the filters aren't terribly expensive. Let's just say your average water maker would be $2,000 or $3,000 for filters to have it totally serviced, redone, and put back together. So do I leave it pickled or not pickled and do the back flush cycle is the variable that we need to discuss.
Right.
So not big money, but something to do, because the surveyor is going to say, well, if it's pickled, I just want to power it up, make sure it works and it's good. Where an owner might want to say, I want to run it. Well, we're going to depickle it first before we run it. Or, if you don't buy the boat now, that's the status of the water maker is depickled.
Right. And that's a good point. It's happened oftentimes that the surveyors will prove that, the equipment has power going to it and then it's operational, but they won't actually make water.
Right.
Because buyers are sometimes pretty sensitive as to where they make water. They don't want, they don't want to use their water maker in brackish water or whatnot.
Give me the rule of thumb on that. What would you say for water maker usage for the person who's never had a water maker?
As far as the maintenance in general, or
when you turn it on?
When you turn it on, you just want to make sure that it is making water. You run it for a little bit, flush that out, and then do it again. Before you even do that, I want you to go ahead and have somebody come on the boat and do a service, replace all the filters, replace.
What I meant was, there's a general rule of thumb to say that don't use a water maker in water you wouldn't swim in. Okay. So if you're in a marina and there's trash floating all around there and you wouldn't swim there, then don't run your water maker there, because what's going to happen is you're going to clog up your filters a lot earlier, because if you're saying it's so dirty that I don't want to swim in it, all that debris is going to get inside that water maker. And now those, $1,000 filters are going to need to be changed in 3 months instead of 9 months or 12 months, depending upon usage.
Right.
Right. That's where I was going with that. All right. So I've got a boat. I told you I wanted to list it. You come visit me at whatever marina in the world. And what are you looking for hull and deck as you're walking around? You're walking around doing a visual inspection. What are you looking for?
Obviously, it's one is aesthetics. You want the boat to be in good shape. You don't want it to be all chalky. You want to make sure that it has been buffed and waxed and well maintained. You don't have rust, coming off of the stainless rails and whatnot. Because again, first impressions are everything, right? Somebody walks up to your boat and they see a rusty mess. They're just going to assume you haven't been maintaining your boat. So you want to make sure that she's standing tall, been nice and clean and shiny, and you want to look for any signs of cracking, any signs of if you have caulking on the exterior of the windows, those things have been properly maintained. Just get an overall good feel for put yourselves in the shoes of a buyer. If you were to walk up to that boat, what are some things that you would look at and that would maybe cause concern in your mind?
You're looking for the time and money,
right?
I'm trying to decide what's going to take to get this to a boat show ready 10 out of 10 in dollars and in time, so that I can communicate that to whoever I'm representing so that they understand the pros and cons of doing something or doing nothing. That's really it, right? So a detail on a big 70-foot yacht could take 2 weeks and cost $10,000, right? You could spend $20,000 on that same boat doing ceramic coating or more. You could do nothing and not sell your boat for 3 years, right? There's a lot of different things where somebody could come up to that chalky boat and say, it needs a $200,000 paint job. When we just discussed, it really just needed a $10,000 detail, but nobody took the time to do it.
Right.
So having run a detail company for a long time, you and me, and manage the crews that do that, and having done it ourselves personally, when we get on your boat, we can have a real conversation about what this is.
Right. We can tell if it's some of them do need a paint job, right. But I would say 90% of the time, right. A good detail will do it. Correct. Same with the varnish, right? Don't let it go so bad that then you have to strip the whole thing all the way down to bare wood and build it back up. Keep up with it so that you don't have to do that and spend a bunch of extra money.
Damage, disclosures, and something we don't see a lot on Marlowe's, blisters. There's just for various build reasons and how these boats are built. They're not really prone to that. I don't see that a lot. There's other manufacturers out there with different build materials that I see more of it. How do you handle that? So the boat's in the water, you're not going to see blisters. But how do you approach the damage or disclosure conversation with the seller?
Well, first, if I'm representing the buyer, I want to make sure that I'm aware of these things if the seller is aware of it, right? When I am dealing with a buyer, obviously I may not know about these things until we haul the boat out and we're doing the survey and we do the inspection. We want to make sure that we go back to the report and see what exactly is being reported by the surveyor, because it could be a blister that is at the structure itself, or it could just be a blister that is on the superficial, 2 top layers of bottom paint, right? We need to make sure we have a better understanding of what exactly we're dealing with before we can talk to a buyer about what we need to do going forward.
I think it comes down to, if your broker doesn't know, he can't disclose, right? Well, if your broker doesn't ask or doesn't know what to ask, he doesn't know. So one thing I like to do when I get on a boat is I ask the seller for the maintenance records. What maintenance records do you have? The guy brings out a whole logbook and a captain's log and all this. I'm getting excited because I know he's probably got his stuff together, right? The guy goes, maintenance records, what are you talking about? I do all my own maintenance and nothing's ever broken on the boat. And I can see, something hanging off. It's not a listing I want to represent. Right. So disclosures, any hard groundings, anything we didn't know about, lightning strikes, all the just general things that if you were a buyer, you would want to know. I want to know, so I get that out early in the conversation. There's nothing worse than finding out, last minute something happened and, oh my gosh, how do we get through this now?
Right.
That's just the worst. So, that's kind of the topic there in hull and deck. I'm looking for cracks. I'm looking for condition of paint. Now I did a pre walkthrough for somebody this week where we made an offer, and I did not represent the seller, and I told him, I said, your radar mask could be painted. You got some cosmetic gel coat chips here and stuff that could be fixed. Your transom could be painted. Your hull looks, average for its age. And his question was, well, what do I do now? I go, it's too late. I said, I'm telling you the condition of your boat. I'm telling the buyer the condition of the boat, and hopefully he pays a number that you agreed to, but he's got some, not only money in play of buying the asset, money in play and fixing it the way he wants in time. So It's too late to do something at that point in time. Right. But I also said in the same statement, your hull looks good. It's not perfect, but you're not asking $4 million for the boat like it's new. So
Right.
you have to factor all that in, is what is average condition for its age, and what's a small fix that gets you a big return on the back end.
Right.
And that's kind of what we're talking about, that we offer, that whoever you're working with should be offering to, in my opinion, because I would want that.
And if you're working with a buyer,
Mhm.
right, and you show up to see a boat that is listed by, another brokerage house, you also have to be mindful that if you're looking at a 20-year-old boat, it's not going to be perfect. Right. Yes, you want it to be in good condition, but you can't expect it to be spotless like it just left the factory, because that's not realistic. If you're, looking at a used boat, as long as it's reflected in the asking price, of course,
Mhm.
right? If they're wanting new boat money for a 20-year-old boat and it's, in rough shape, obviously that may not be a good boat to purchase, right? If they want all the money with a little bit of a rough condition. But that's something that is also very important for us as brokers to discuss with the buyers that we deal with, that Mr. Jones, we're looking at, buying a $1.5 million boat. This boat new would be $5 million. So you have to consider the condition. You may have to spend a little bit of money here and there, but you're getting a good deal because the bones of the boat are in good shape. Okay.
Let's talk about, fluff and buff a little bit more, because a lot of times people don't notice it. And they ask me about, what should I do? How much should I stage my boat? We're still going to use it. It's our summer home in Florida. And I find when I come back the second time, the boat looks a little bit worse. Why does it look worse? Well, it's decluttered. Thank you. But there's dust bunnies everywhere, right? So what can we do about that? I mean, that if it was a house, it's really simple. You call your clean girl. If it's a boat, why is it any different?
So it's a tough conversation, because I see both sides, right? I've shown boats to buyers that I've been working with where they don't want anything on the boat, so they can just see the total layout and they can envision themselves on the boat with their stuff. And then there's some people that just cannot get past that. They see a bare boat, they can't really picture how it would be decorated and whatnot. So you have to deal with both.
There's a fine line there. I think the real estate industry does a great job of it, right? I walk into a house that's empty. Oh, I don't like it. I walk into a house where there's shoes everywhere. I don't like it. So the kind of lived in how I would envision this, but the closet's pretty much empty and clean is the look that we're going for. And it's not really different on a boat. If it's a multi-million-dollar house or multi-million-dollar boat, the expectation's very similar.
Right. If you're going to be showing a boat and you have a couple of days heads up, maybe you can reach out to that seller and say, Mr. Jones, we're going to be showing your boat. I want to make sure that one is maybe washed on the exterior. There's no work ongoing inside or out. And on the interior piece, get rid of those, dust bunnies and whatnot.
Right.
If you don't have that option, you get a phone call, say, hey, I want to see this boat tonight at 7:00. If you're able to make that happen, maybe get there a little bit early and just look around and make sure if you can wipe it down and make it look a little bit better, that helps that showing as well.
Yeah. I always get to a showing at least an hour early so I can do the unexpecteds, because they always pop up.
Exactly.
I don't know what it is, but
there might be a hatch that is open and you don't know if somebody's working in there or whatnot. If you can shut it, you have that time to correct some issues if there are any issues, or call the seller and ask for direction on certain things, and maybe touch up the interior if you need to.
My nephew, who's my technical assistant, I love my line that said, technically you could have assisted me with this. So it covers everything. It's my catch-all. We had a deal out of state. It happened to be in Marlow, and I called the seller. I said, what do you have that's broken on the boat right now? I'm in the parts department. What can I grab and bring and fix before survey day? Because I knew I was going to be up there a couple days early. Dust bunnies and all the type of stuff that we had to do. Was able to fix a couple things on the boat, small stuff, but it didn't make it to the survey list, so it wasn't broken. Right, more value for the customer. So we talked about interior clean, decluttered, and presentable. I understand everybody needs to have 20 pairs of shoes in their yacht, but maybe while you're trying to sell it, maybe we only keep 5 pairs of shoes. That type of stuff. Do you know what I mean? Because if you want it staged, and then I was gonna say, we've already covered all that. All right. So there's no second chance for a first impression. And that's an inside and out conversation. It's a visual and it's a smell conversation, right?
Yep.
It's really it. Safety equipment, right? So this is something that's kind of, I will just confess, often overlooked, right? How many times have you gone up and made sure that the EPIRB batteries and everything is in check, either date or certification wise? The life raft is in certification. Have you opened up the flares to make sure that their fire kit is not expired? That one slips by the goalie all the time.
All the time.
So we might as well talk about it right now, right? If you're going to the Bahamas or going around the world, those are important safety features that should be up to date on your boat. Fire system, same conversation, okay? That fire tag needs to be recertified. It needs to stay within pressure. I believe it's an annual inspection. It's not terribly expensive. Let's just say it's $700 for conversation's sake today for a Fireboy system in your engine room. Maybe it's $600 or $500 depending upon where you live. But that turns into a $1,000 or a $5,000 thing at survey day, because now it's, oh, well, is the bottle past due and need to be replaced too? Is it just this recertification? We don't have time to figure that out, so I'm going to ask for the most. Mm-hmm. If you did that on the front end, you know exactly what it is. You'd have the sticker and the tag, and it wouldn't be a conversation because it wouldn't be a survey item. You should do it anyway because it falls back to good boating practices.
Exactly. And there's, like you mentioned, there's a couple of bigger items like the fire extinguishing system, and then there's the flares, which is the smaller items. You can go to your local store like West Marine, for example, and just pick up a safety kit, and you can have all that stuff today. But one thing that I often see overlooked is the life raft, right? Because you don't use it. And
you hope to not.
You hope to not ever use it, right?
It sits up there, gets sun faded, and
so I've seen it where it's 2, 3, 4 years past the date where it should have been recertified, and that's not something that you can just call somebody up and they can come on and look at it and all is good. You have to remove it. You have to send it somewhere. They have to recertify, get it back on the boat. So if you're leaving on a trip tomorrow, you're not going to have time to do it. If it's survey day, you're not going to have time to do it. You want to make sure that you look at that.
If it's a survey item and the buyer says, it's $5,000, I want $15,000 for it, or I want you to do it. Either way, it's going to be too much money. It's going to be too much time, because now the guy's closed. He's leaving with the boat. He wants to go from here straight to the Keys. And where's that life raft? It's back at whomever, Winslow or whatever, getting service for X amount of weeks before it's back on the boat. So now he's having to ride without that safety equipment aboard.
It adds headaches for both parties.
Correct.
Right. So there's no winner there.
Get it fixed before you sell is the cheapest option and best option. Right. Fuel systems, leaks, damage on tanks, stuff that we don't see a lot because of the type of materials being used.
Yep.
But not that long ago, there was iron fuel tanks out there that we represented where we had to have conversations about that. So let's maybe dive out of this field for a second into that field and just talk about what you would look for in fuel systems on a boat that maybe had,
right. So
tanks.
we don't often see many issues with that, because fuel is one of those things that I would say 99% of people will take care of that right away. But if you have a sight gauge, right, it's a piece of glass where you can visually see the level of the fuel. Sometimes that will break, right, and fuel can leak out of there. Check your hoses, check the clamps on the hoses, check the tanks themselves. If you're going in an extended trip, or if you're getting ready to sell your boat, make sure you get maybe a technician to get on the boat if you're not 100% sure on where everything is, and have them inspect those those tanks or tank to make sure that everything is good. They're in good shape. Unfortunately, sometimes it's one of those things that it's not leaking till it is, right? But if you can be proactive and look for anything that may be an indication of something that could be starting to wear, maybe in the corners, one of the welds or whatnot, just get ahead of it.
And depending upon the material of the tank, there could be rust issues as well.
Right.
So there was, let's remain brandless here, but there was a period of time 20, 25 years ago where a lot of work was done at this facility, pulling tanks out of boats and replacing them because they were rusting out because the fuel fitting was right above, right? Well, okay, I want the fuel, I want it to go right to the tank. That makes sense. But when the caulk around that wears, the teak around that wears, and now the water comes in, sits on top of that metal fuel tank, now it rusts out. Now my tanks are rusty and they break when I'm in the worst possible time in the ocean, right?
Right.
So there's a lot of things to factor in on boats, especially when you're talking about boats maybe older than 10 years old. What things you would want to look for. Again, proper broker knowledge of who's representing you, proper surveyor knowledge of inspecting the type of vessel you're going to buy so that you don't get caught with a whammy. And a whammy might be your first trip, you're ready to go cruising and your fuel tank breaks because it was iron and rusted out, as an example. Right. So that's pretty simple on fuel systems. Also, rake cores, maybe make sure that the rake cores are clean. Look at the pressure gauge in the rake cores. Make sure that they're not, all the way up in the red. That's an indication of lack of maintenance, and we're going to have issues or lack of performance in our sea trial. If your system or boat doesn't have that type of stuff, that's why that sea trial before listing would be good to see if it's making RPM and it's actually doing the performance figures it should be doing.
Right. And then simple things like if you have a fuel gauge, right, at your helm, and it's a digital gauge and it's not reading the same as your sight tube or whatnot, that's something that you may want to have calibrated. Little stuff. But if you're going to be on the boat and you're going on a 2-month trip, you think you have a ton of fuel and all of a sudden you run out of fuel because the gauge that you're relying on isn't exactly accurate. Might seem like something very simple, but it happens. You want to make sure that you cover as many bases as possible.
Sight tubes make me comfortable because digital gauges are accurately inaccurate often.
It's true.
Right? They can work today fine, and then they get hung up or break. And if I have that sight tube, I can see. What about documentation? So you're at my boat. We're talking about listing. You're asking me for copies of these documents. Why do you care about copies of these documents?
Because we're getting ready to sell your boat. We usually don't ask for these things towards the end of the process.
You don't need them to the end.
We don't need them till the end, but that can hold up a deal, right? If your registration is expired, one of the things that I see all the time is the tender is not, doesn't have a registration. Or
what do you mean you don't have a title for your tender? Well, you don't get titles for tenders in Kentucky, or whatever the conversation is that we have to figure out. Is that true, Mr. Jones, or did you lose it, Mr. Jones?
Does it go with the boat, or does it not go? The tender is probably the single biggest thing that when it comes to documentation that we have issues with.
You got a $3 million boat, you got a $30,000 tender.
That's holding up the deal.
You know what I mean? It's like,
all right. So just get ahead of it. Make sure that if you need docs, if you need registration, make sure you have the title and anything that you may need. And if you're not 100% sure, check with your documentation agent, check with a closing coordinator, whoever you're working with, to see what other documents you will need for the closing so that you're prepared. Just like you're preparing the boat for the sale, you're preparing the documentation for the boat for that sale.
Right. This comes down to records. There's maintenance of records, just like there's maintenance of materials on boats. And I will tell you that the better maintenance history you have and better records you have in the boat, the more dollars you're going to get for it when you go to sell. People are more confident with it and they will pay more. It makes the inspection process easier.
Right. I had this deal a few years ago where this gentleman bought a boat, not with me. He bought it from a different brokerage house. And we met through one of the boat shows and he decided to list the boat with me. Well, I didn't know this at the time, but he had bought an inflatable tender, in the couple of years that he owned the boat, and he never told me about it until we went to closing. And he had an inflatable tender with a very small engine in the lazarette, and it came up towards the end of the deal. So that held it up for an additional few weeks, which obviously he wanted to sell the boat and the buyer wanted his boat, but we couldn't do anything because that was still tied up in the deal. He never even thought anything of it. And at the time, I never thought anything of it because I didn't see a tender up there. It was folded up in a box, and he just had a little outboard in the lazarette. So things can come up, but if you can think of going through a punch list of things to ask, it definitely helps. Yep, it could save you a lot of headaches.
How many times have you had a survey item where a seacock needs to be exercised?
Just about all of them.
Right. So what is a seacock? If you don't know, it's a valve that shuts off water flow from your water intake before it gets to your equipment. And those should be able to be maneuvered easily by anybody aboard. You shouldn't have to be the biggest guy on the boat. You know, Tommy can do it, so it's fine. Well, what if Tommy's at the helm and Jimmy needs to go downstairs, you know? So when you do your bottom job, here's a couple things that I want you to check. Exercise and lubricate your seacocks, because if you're going to break it, it's a lot better to be out of the water when that happens than in the water. Okay. So make sure that happens on your annual or every 2-year bottom job, however your maintenance plan is for that. I would also add to that, check your underwater lights. Okay. I was on a survey sea trial. We anchored out. The underwater lights look phenomenal. We hauled the boat out. We look, only one of them was on. but that one light was so bright you didn't know the other ones were missing, right? So the time to really check that, if you're not going to jump on the water and go swimming and look at it, is on your bottom job, because you can easily flick that switch and see, okay, yeah, that one's not lit. Let's fix it. We're out of the water, right? Sometimes some of these things are easier to fix out of the water. So underwater lights being one of them. And then zincs and bottom paint, right? If you know that your bottom paint's due, it's a good idea to get that buttoned up before you go to sell the boat, in my opinion. It just everybody knows when you've got the maintenance records, okay, I don't have to worry about this. It's not I'm buying this $3 million boat and now I got to go to the yard for 2 weeks, next month because the bottom paint's due.
Right.
All these types of things. So with maintenance records, those types of things are ironed out easy and early. What's something cosmetically on a boat that is often overlooked, that's a little bit of money that can make it really pop in the resale market, in your opinion?
I would say two things come to mind. One, a detail. Mm-hmm. Just like we talked about earlier, just buffing it, waxing it, it makes it pop. It makes it a lot more desirable.
So let's dive deep. Half my boat's painted, half my boat's gel coat. What's my expectation? How often? And ballpark what it would cost? I've got a 70-foot yacht.
So the gel coat is going to have to be waxed and maintained a bit more often than paint. And paint is, even though it's a little bit softer than gel coat, it's a lot easier to, if you need to do a repair, to blend in or to maintain over time, just because of the nature of paint. It doesn't oxidize as quickly as gel coat does. Mm-hmm. Depending on the condition, right, how oxidized it is, what it needs, if you have stainless around it, if you have, what other components are on the boat, will dictate, the price of that of that detail. I've seen them on a 70-foot boat. It can be $2,000. It can be over 10 grand, right, mm-hmm. depending on what exactly it needs. Mm-hmm. There's different types of materials that you want to use on gel coat versus paint. Mm-hmm. And that goes down to the type of buffing pad that you use, the revolutions that you use in your buffer, the waxes, the polymers, all that stuff are things to consider when you're detailing the boat. And there's a huge, range there.
And what to use based on where you keep it. If you're in a covered boat shed, as an example, in fresh water, you're not worried as much about saltwater spots or UV protection in the materials that you're using on your boat. So there's a lot of variables to discuss. That's why we want to go see it. We want to, the whole entire thing. We need to know all the information to give the best advice.
Exactly. And that's one thing that I can tell you on a personal level. It's helped me being, managing the service company for years, because I've seen all that stuff. So when I go and talk to a buyer or seller, I can tell them what I think it needs and what I think the boat is lacking. And I can explain to them, what it means to wax the gel coat or wax the paint, or, mm-hmm. what exactly it needs. Mm-hmm. And
or buff it versus having to repaint it. That's a big difference in cost. And we can say, we think you buff it, it's going to last for 12 months versus painting, it's going to last for 10 years, but the multiple is, 20 times more or whatever.
And sometimes we'll say, I'll just get a buffer and a wheel and I'll buff the thing. Well, you can't do that. But then they're concerned about, why is it all swirly, right? There's a way to do it.
Why do most gel coat boats need to be painted early? Because your buddy Tommy buffed it. And he buffed the heck out of it. He buffed it right down to the fiberglass.
Yep. People get aggressive with it.
Right? That's what happens. So saving $2,000 to have the guy who's your whatever, mm-hmm. I can use this specific example because the guy had a hunting ranch and he used the guy from the hunting ranch for everything. The guy from the hunting ranch reupholstered the stid chairs upstairs. And guess what? You could tell. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It was not like you sent him back to Stid and have him done professionally. Well, he also buffed the boat. Well, he buffed it like an 800-pound gorilla, and somebody had to paint that boat when they bought it. Right. Okay. So those types of things, use professionals.
Use professionals.
Right. So we talked about cosmetics, appearance. What are some things, first impressions count, right? I've got some notes here. Well-maintained, fully functional yacht equals more money to mm-hmm. the person who's going to buy it or sell it, and get professional repairs, just touching back on that. But first impression stuff, what's big for you?
For me,
cookies in the oven?
No.
I've never done that.
Never done that.
Nope.
No, for me, I just want it to be not cluttered. So for example, when you step on a boat, I don't want there to be lines and fenders and plastic totes and whatnot in the cockpit. You can't even walk around, right? You want to be able to get on the boat and envision yourself as this being your boat and how you're going to use it. As you walk in and through the boat, you want to make sure that that third stateroom that we never use isn't loaded with a bunch of stuff. It's not a storage room, right? You want to make sure that you can see the bed, that you can see the storage areas. So just make sure that it's not cluttered and that it's clean, right? We understand you can't wash your boat every single day, but once a week, every couple of weeks or whatnot, to keep it clean as you're, having that boat up for sale. Oftentimes I've seen where the boat, it hasn't been cleaned in a month. And it rained, dirty rainwater, and you have the streaks all over the boat. There's just nothing that you can do to undo that.
A green boat is not a clean boat.
No. And in Florida, it doesn't take a whole lot for that to happen.
It doesn't take a lot for a little water pooling to sit cooked in the sun all day to turn green and algae. So somebody needs to get there and take care of that. It's not a good presentation of a yacht for sale.
Right. If you have a tender, you have a cover on that tender. If it rains or even the dew,
is it a breathable cover or is it a completely waterproof cover?
You can have a bunch of mold that builds under that. So just things to be mindful of.
Yep.
If you've been used to doing everything on the boat yourself, if you've been doing the washing and the waxing and the maintenance and all that, and you're not able to do that or you don't want to do that anymore, maybe hire a company that can come out to the boat every couple of weeks and just keep it looking nice so that we can have a better shot at selling it.
Yep. Okay. I've got a couple more things just to touch on some survey items that people should be looking at before they go to survey. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about?
Just my overall advice for anybody, whether you're getting ready for a trip or whether you're getting ready to list and sell your boat, is maintain it. You're going to pay for it at some point. It's either going to be today or it's going to be at survey. And the quicker you get to that, the better. Like we talked about earlier, is going to avoid a lot of headaches during your trip or during the sales process.
Okay. I agree 100%. I think that the earlier you can get stuff corrected, the better, because you also get use of it. Right. So a couple last closing points here. Waterline nicks and scratches, right? When you get somebody on the boat and they get to the point of making an offer, I generally try to tell them to factor everything they visually see wrong with the boat into their offer, so we're not renegotiating that later. Well, you can't see everything, right? You couldn't see a 5-foot scratch at the waterline on the port side when you boarded the boat from the starboard side because you can't just hang over and see it. But I can see the varnish, so I can have a conversation with that guy and say, listen, the varnish is due. It's going to be $5,000. It needs a maintenance coat, and there's some repairs right here, so maybe add another $1,000 for that. So we're not nickel and diming over that when it comes to survey negotiations, because if we can talk about that before, we don't need to negotiate it later, right? It was already negotiated on the purchase price. We got a discount from the ask, and that's already included. But things like that scratch, I can't see. So fix that stuff, right? I mean, when you do a bottom job and you got a 5-foot scratch on the port side, yes, have the yard fix it, because they're going to ask for that when they are surprised to see it later. And then guess what? It's the same conversation. Yard told you it was $1,000 to fix. They're asking for $5,000 for it because they have to haul it out again as one, right? Now it's the time and inconvenience factor on top of it. So don't let small things that you can correct on an annual basis be multipliers of discounts for survey items later.
Nobody likes surprises.
They don't like surprises, 100%. Okay. So that was one. Another one, routine maintenance on items like sea strainers and, filter baskets and water filters. Get all that done, before a guy walks through your boat, before you're ready to sell it. Okay. Not often will I have a buyer go to the level of inspecting these things before survey day, but sometimes I do. Sometimes I've got somebody that'll show up on this boat and they love it and they walk through it and they say, okay, we'll be back tomorrow. And they show up tomorrow in the overalls and they are literally surveying the boat themselves, climbing in every single hatch, looking at everything. When they find that water filter that's black because it hasn't been changed in 9 months. Oh, I don't like the boat anymore. Let's go to the next one. I can tell who this owner is. I know how he keeps his boat because of one thing that maybe the captain forgot to do or the owner forgot to do, or he forgot about it because he stopped using it and that's why he decided to sell it. So as you're talking about listing, it's good to get all that stuff changed. If you change it now, it's going to be clean when it's time, to go to survey or sell on the average time on market and resale. All right. If it's on market for a long time, change it again. They're not expensive.
There's no downside to doing it.
Right. General maintenance records up to date. Service on things like stabilizer systems. So it's not just the bottom job and the oil changes and the generator oil changes. What about the stabilizer fins that are awesome and electric and 0 speed, but have a 2-year service interval? And there's an alarm going off on there that if you didn't sea trial the boat or talk to the owner about it, it's a surprise on survey day, right? And can you fix it now? You can't fix it now. So now it's how much does it cost? What's the inconvenience? What's the multiplier on the true cost? So know those things, read your manuals, understand the service intervals, and be proactive on that type of stuff. Okay. There's systems out there like Vessel Vanguard that can help you with that. There's qualified people in the industry that just know how to do it. There's service companies that can come to your boat and assist with that. So there's a lot of ways to get it done. It's up to you as an owner to take care of the boat.
Right. And like we talked about earlier, it's never going to be perfect. But if you have that alarm going off on the stabilizer fins, but you can prove, you say, here's a record that I just had these things serviced 6 months ago, right? Don't just let them assume that you have been negligent and not service them properly. Right. You can just say, I service them. They've been working fine. So this is something new that came up. It's a much easier conversation to have.
Right. And I'll be blunt. If you're that type of person who doesn't take care of your boat, and it has a lot of things with it, don't call me because I'm not going to represent you to sell it. I just won't unless you're willing to fix it. Or maybe I'll buy it from you at a discount and I'll fix it all myself and then I'll sell it. But I just, I've been doing this too long and I understand all the trouble that comes with that.
Right.
And it's just, in my opinion, not the way to do it. Loose gear. So I got a survey item for a loose gear on a boat. So owner got a new boat, upgraded the heck out of it during the build, upgraded the heck out of it after taking delivery. One of the items was added a subwoofer. Okay. Big, nice Bose subwoofer, right? Put it under the VIP bed. Didn't secure it. Just laid it down in the deck. Well, if you're boating, if you're never leaving the dock, right? That'll probably be fine. If you are in somewhere where there's no seas ever, probably be fine. But if you're on a ocean going vessel, one day the weather will get you and it might not be fine. So if you're going to mount stuff on a boat or put stuff on a boat, think about securing it, right? Big artwork that's top heavy and metal, looks like a battle axe. Well, if you forget to take it down before that big wave comes because your buddy accidentally waked you and now that falls and scratches your table, that's something that's preventable by proper mounting or securing, or tasteful boat decor is another way to look at it, where I can buy stuff that looks good, but also might not be so top heavy or so brittle to fall over. Right. There's a lot of ways to do it. You can build a custom mount that's then secured. You can use stuff called hurricane putty to mount it down. But at some point in time, if it's 100 pounds of weight here and a little bean pole at the bottom, how's that going to stand up unless we secure it through alternative means?
And if you absolutely must have that, just be mindful of it. When you put it away. When you take off, just put it away, put it somewhere that's secure.
Right. Broken hatches and handles, right? I understand that happens. Some of our guests don't understand how to use it and they use all their weight to do something and they break it. Your manufacturer probably has those in supply, right? You got 2 broken, order 5, put them on the boat. So that's there and you're ready when that breaks. You've already got it. It's 4 screws. You switch it out. But don't let that go all the way to the end of survey time frame. And now there's a broken latch that's on a survey item and somebody else has to fix it. Because again, that $30 latch is now a $300 survey item, right? You could have done it yourself type of stuff. Check manual operation of all bilge pumps is something that I recommend is done on your vessels on a monthly basis. Just because the light comes on or you push the button, the light comes on doesn't mean it actually works. And the good surveyors out there are going to go down, they're going to crawl in that bilge, they're going to pull that up, they're going to make sure it works. Same thing in the high water bilge along. So it's a good idea to do that yourself or have somebody do that on your boat, because if you have water intrusion or you're going to sail and go to survey, let's fix it early. It's way cheaper and it's safer for you while you're using the boat. Right? What else you got, Rod?
I think we've covered a good amount. I can't say everything because there's always something that comes up, and we learn something from every single survey. Right. But I think we've covered, I would say, over 90% of what we normally see.
I call it a conversation starter from our experience. The variables are massive because it depends on what we're talking about for a boat, where we're talking about. in the world of using it and who we're talking about. So
Right.
some of the stuff, the guy knows everything and he stopped watching a minute 3. Some of the stuff the guy knows or gal knows nothing, and they want to call us because they want to know the rest of what it is. So when you're ready to buy a, high quality diesel powered motor yacht, keep us in the loop. Let us know how we can help you. It doesn't matter what brand it is. We've probably driven it. I was going to ask you this. I forgot to put it down, but how many different brands of boats have you sold over the years? Because I wanted to add that to what I've sold. My guess is we're somewhere between 75-ish, 100-ish. I don't know. I think I'm near 50. Last time I updated my bio.
30 something.
So let's just call it, maybe there's some overlap. So let's just say it's 60, right? Because I'm sure you sold stuff that I haven't sold. Let's just say it's 60 different brands. So just because you're going to look at ABC Yacht and you don't have somebody that you feel comfortable with representing you, doesn't mean that it's not worth your time to reach out to us and see if we can help. That's really it. That's what we're here to do, right?
Exactly.
We're here to talk about everything yachting. We're here to talk about our expertise. So we are going to be inviting some more experts on the podcast so that they can speak with us. We can ask good questions and they can inform you, because that's the goal. So if you have a topic that you would like us to cover, please shoot me an email and we'll get it in queue. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day. Eric Gervais, Rod Silva.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us at Everything Yachting. I hope you've enjoyed diving into the yachting world today. If you've enjoyed or learned something, please subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for more. Until next time, my friends, healthy families, happy memories, and may fair winds and smooth seas guide your future yachting adventures.